really good to me. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, this guy's probably here to talk about the seagulls and the crickets, and what we want to hear about is the birds and the bees. Don't kid me, I've been watching you. You keep looking at each other and smiling and winking. When I asked for my wife's hand, my father-in-law said it would be an absolutely perfect marriage. The rocks in my head would perfectly fit the holes in hers. I see some boy-girl relationships out there. I just want you to think about those things. These are very serious questions. And, of course, when President Irene asked for Kathy's hand, he was a little smarter and a little more aggressive, and I have to confess that Kathy's dad was not, he's never told this story publicly, but he shared it with me privately, that Kathy's dad was not entirely smitten by this young man, and in fact was livid when he had the audacity to come and say, that he'd like to marry Kathy, and he just sort of flipped out. Went on and on and on and turned red and purple and green, and finally finished with this great crescendo and said, "Do you think I want that girl tied to an idiot for the rest of her life?" And only Hal Irene, only President Henry Irene would have been able to say, "Then I assume I have your permission." I mean, now, a president like that can't be all bad. He's going to take this school somewhere. I've thought a little bit about the message I want to give you, and if I can get to it. And I suppose you'll understand when I'm through the meaning of the only joke I know, which I will now tell, since it seems to me to have something to do with what I do want to say. It's a story which you probably already heard. I hear jokes a lot later than most people. But it's a story about a little guy and a big guy. And the little guy would go to his favorite Pizza Hut every Friday night and order this pizza, pepperoni and mushroom. And he'd just be sitting down to eat it, and this great big guy would come in, big sort of Charles Atlas type guy, and would walk in and come up to the little guy and just never a word spoken. And the little guy would fly the length of the room, and he'd end up in a muddle at the end, and the pizza's all over him, the mushrooms in his pocket, and he's sort of out cold. And the big guy, walks out, and as he goes out, he says to the little pizza cook, "When that guy comes to, tell him that was karate from the Philippines." And he walked out. He'd come in the next week, the same guy's there, little guy's there, ordered the same pizza. Well, it's not the same pizza, it's a new order, but it's pepperoni and mushroom. And the same thing again. The big guy walks up, and he's out, and I mean, it's all over him, and the table's upside down, and the big guy walks out, and he says, "When he comes to, tell him that was kung fu from Taiwan." And night after night this happened, but the little guy may be dumb, but he's not stupid. After a while, he doesn't come back. But the little guy's, though he's gone, the big guy's in the habit of coming, so he comes and orders a pizza, sits down, about ready to have it. The little guy walks in and just clobbers him. Just absolutely clobbers this guy, and he is gone. He'll be out till a week from Thursday. And the little guy turns and walks out, and he says, "When he comes to, tell him that was a crowbar from Sears and Roebuck." I wish I knew any kung fu. I wish I sort of knew spiritual kung fu and could really impress you. I don't. Mine is sort of crowbar variety. I just come sort of straight out over the pulpit, and in fact, a time or two, the pulpit is nearly gone with me. So if you'll understand that premise on which I start, maybe you'll forgive me for what I consider fairly straightforward advice. I've never been very non-directive in my life. So let me say this about what I think you are and what you're doing. We were in a fist fight a long time ago. I don't know whether that was literal or physical, but it's one of the few things we know about the premortal existence. If you sat in Brother Seller's religion class, you'd think we knew a lot more than we do. Only Keith Sellers would let me say that about him. But we do know some things, and we know a lot more than anybody else on the earth. And one of the things we know is right here in this Protestant New Testament. The missionaries use it, but the missionaries don't quite read enough verses. There's another couple of verses. The verses, you may know them, are from Revelation 12. It talks about a war in heaven in which there was this life and death issue. I mean, literally life and death. It says that they love not their lives unto death, and were willing to fight for this business. Now, I suppose that means spiritual life, because they had no mortality. But they were laying everything on the line for the blood of the Lamb, for the testimony of Christ. And they were persecuted and haunted. They were, the word that's used is accused, day and night, it says, by Satan, that old serpent called the devil. The missionaries know the verse. That's usually where we end. But let me just suggest these couple of verses keyed off of this material out of the 12th chapter of Revelation. Satan is cast out. You know the story. The victory was Christ's and ours. But a third followed Christ and left. But they went where? That great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth. Have you ever wondered why Satan was available to talk to Adam and Eve when they came to this new beautiful garden on this newly created earth? I suppose this is part of the reason. They were cast out there, and they simply carried on. They carried on the fight. We talk about a war in heaven, and that's a perfectly legitimate phrase, but I see it, if you can catch this difference and the distinction, I see it more as a battle in heaven, which was won, but the war is not over. Because Satan and his angels are cast out into the earth, and now I read on beyond where the missionaries memorize. And when the dragon saw that he was cast out into the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. That's an intriguing verse. What does that mean? I don't know. John writes in this couched, sort of veiled imagery because Rome's listening. But something about Satan persecuting the woman which brought forth the man-child. Is that Eve? And all men children? All mankind? Is it Mary? And specifically trying to defeat the Son of God? I don't know. Maybe all of those. But the point I'm trying to make is that the fight is still on. The one we thought that was over, the one in which we thought we were victorious, we were for a time, but only for a time. When the dragon saw that he was cast out into the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have a testimony of Jesus. Does that ring any bell? Who is the fight with on this earth? It's with exactly the same group that it was with before. Those who keep the commandments of God and have a testimony of Jesus. You're marked men, you're marked women. You've got howitzers lined up all up and down the streets and over the mountain and into the valley. Because the fight's still on. We're born innocently, ignorantly, with a veil drawn across our mind, and it takes us quite a few years to realize that there's a fight on. And for a certain number of years, at least 8, we're protected. Christ reaches out with those gracious arms of mercy and protects us against this kind of battlefield. But then we start to fight it, and by the time we're at Rick's, we're really fighting it. Because we're old enough and smart enough, and our genes are working enough that we're facing a lot of battles. Socially, culturally, intellectually, academically, physically, morally. And we realize, again, if we had forgotten, if it was taken from us for those early years, it starts to come back, why this is such a tough issue, why it is a fight, and why we would go to the brink, why we would lay down our lives if we had to, hopefully, for this. Because the issue there, initially, ostensibly, was agency, right? We were going to fight over how to make these choices, or whether to make them at all. But what was the issue behind the issue? What was the issue behind the agency? It was the decision about whether we were going to progress or not. The issue, the agency, the choice was somehow fundamental to the fact that we needed to grow and be like God. And one proposition was that you shall not ever be like God. Do you understand that that's what Satan was saying then, and that's what he says now? His fundamental proposition is you will not ever become like God. And Christ said, yes, you will if you want to. Now, you get at your age, and you face a lot of those decisions, and a lot of them have very far-reaching implications about whether you will ever achieve that or not. You knew it once, you testified and fought for it once, but now it's a little blurry. We're just sort of getting back in the saddle again, and it can be a little tough. And sometimes it hardly seems worth fighting for, and maybe it's just as well not to be a God. At least that's what our actions, that's what our hopes, that's what some of our goals, that's what some of our words sound like. Well, there's a protective period where I think the Lord sort of blinks at that, where it's the childhood period of our lives. 8 and on, and if you're a convert to the church, maybe you're 60. We don't expect of a 60-year-old who just joined the church what we expect of a 30-year-old, do we, who's been on a mission and married in the temple? No, there's a kind of a childhood, spiritually and theologically as well as chronologically. And to those people, the Lord is very generous. As He is with our little children and with these loved ones, and up to the age of 8, they're absolutely, totally shielded. Now, you go through that, and I go through it, and maybe some of us in some ways are still in it. The church goes through it. There is a moment in the 9th chapter of Luke where John and some disciples are out teaching. And they find a man who's testifying, teaching in the name of Christ. And they don't know who he is. He's never been out to priesthood meetings. He's never showed up at a welfare project. They don't know anything about him. And John goes up and says, "Here, you quit that." And they come back and they say, "Master, we found one prophesying in thy name and casting out devils, and we forbade him." Do you remember the reply? Do you know what Jesus said? It's early in the ministry. It's very early. It's at a time when He's performing miracles, and He said it'd be just as well if you didn't talk about this. He turns water into wine and said, let's just sort of leave it here within the group. He heals the centurion's daughter and said, talk about it in family home evening, but let's limit. There is a very sensitive childhood period of the church which they're in. Do you know what Christ responded to John? He said, "Forbid them not." Don't forbid them. He that is not against us is for us. Can that rattle around for just a second? He that is not against us is for us. Now that's a kind of a passive participation in anything. What it means is that you're a member of the church if you just don't burn down the chapel and steal the money from the stake clerk. If you're not against us, you're for us. Now that's what my wife says to my 2-year-old. We have a 2-year-old. And if any of us survive the experience, it'll be a wonderful, wonderful moment for the Holland household. But this kid is all that his brothers and sisters were put together. And my wife says to him, "Sweetheart, if you're not against me, you're for me. Just, don't dump the garbage on the floor and your mama's big sweet helper. Don't eat the dog food and your mama's big helper." Well, he's not mama's big helper at all. All mama wants to do is not clean the floor 12 times a day. And if we just won't dump the garbage, we're mama's big helper. That's okay at 2. But we don't say that to our 10-year-old. We say to our 10-year-old, "The garbage, son, is your responsibility. You are the garbage man in our family. You check around and you look in the waste baskets and you look under the sink, and when they're full, we want you to take them out to the cans in the garage. And every Thursday night, we want you to take the cans from the garage out to the street. That's your responsibility. We don't want to tell you. We don't want to remind you. We trust you. You're a big boy now. You're not 2. You're 10. And you can handle the garbage. It is not enough for you, son, not to eat the dog food. You have to feed the dog. The dog is your responsibility. You have to bathe him. You have to make sure he's licensed. You have to make sure that he's clean and that his fur's cut. The dog is your responsibility. We cannot get that out of our 2-year-old, but we expect it out of our 10-year-old. Because it seems to me that we are committed, whether we like it or not, We have made a decision that puts us into a world that demands a kind of growth and development that keeps us moving. And if we're not moving one way, then we are by definition moving another way. But we are on the move somewhere. As Brother Richard L. Evans used to say, unless you change direction, you're going to get where you're going. Now that can either be a very good thing, and for most of you it would be. For some of you that may not be a very good thing. It may be a very unhappy thing. But we are going somewhere, I promise you. And so is my 10-year-old, and so soon will my 2-year-old. In fact, he's on his way now. And we're going to be asking more and more, and by the time he hits 8, he's going to quote from the 29th section, begin to become accountable. And when he's 12, he's going to be a little more accountable. And when he's 19 and enrolled at Rick's, he's going to be very accountable. Well, that's what the church goes through. There is a time when it isn't early in the ministry. There is a time when our numbers are so few and our profile is so low that we can't afford to even talk about the miracles. May I quote from this delightful book that President Eyring and Brother Sellers gave us a chance to have some fun with this morning in a class. Unless someone has moved it here, I quote from the 10th chapter of 2nd Nephi. You'll recognize these are prophecies about the last days. These are those prophecies about Columbus and the Revolutionary War and on through 1st Nephi and into 2nd Nephi, about what it means when the church is not insecure, about what it means when there's only two churches, the church of the Lamb of God and the church of the devil. That sort of ultimate opposition in all things. And this is what the Lord says then about that time. Now we're talking about a 19-year-old and not a 2-year-old. Wherefore he that fighteth against Zion, both Jew and Gentile, both bond and free, both male and female, shall perish. For they are they who are the whore of all the earth. They who are not for me are against me. Can your ear pick up the shift in those two propositions? It's the same language, the syntax is different. We've changed the prepositions and the pronouns. Now we say, whereas before we said, if you're not against me, you're for me. You know, just don't cause any trouble. Hang back and sort of keep out of the way and don't throw any rocks, and we'll call you one of us. Not so. Not now. Not for eternity. Not ever. Because now it comes to a point when collectively and individually we have to be big boys. We have to be big girls and stand up and be counted. And now it says, if you are not for me, actively participating, explicitly, inimitably for me, then you're against me. See, now it isn't enough not to burn down the chapel. Now you pay a little. Now you buy the carpet and clean the windows and dig the weeds. That's your chapel. Now it's not enough not to steal the money from the state clerk. You pay your tithing. You spend some money to go on a mission. You make some offerings to welfare and budget and service. It's not enough simply to not harass and kick and gouge the home teachers when they come. You go do your own. You do some good and make some contribution, because if you do not, you are against him in this final moment. And that's because it seems to me he is trying to take us from a childhood, a youthfulness, an innocence, an ignorance that's all understandable and probably looked upon with compassion, but that we cannot dwell in and revel in and stay in forever. And you're old enough now, and I'm old enough now, that both of us ought to begin to move out of that. It's not unlike what Paul said to the Corinthians. When I was a child, I thought a lot of childish things. I saw things as a child, and some of them were sort of hidden, and there were some dark spots over here. And I was a fairly incomplete man. But now that I'm older, now that I'm a man, now that I'm a woman, I put away childish things. And I see very, very clearly there aren't any dark spots anymore, because the light of life is shining. I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. And I'm going to know as I am known. I'm going to be seen as I'm seen. And that's going to be true of you. Somehow, some way, someday, you've got to be very big people, because it's a very big world, and you're at the age where you're old enough to have children, you're old enough to go on missions, you're old enough to hold the Melchizedek priesthood, which is the power that runs this universe. That is a very big person's world. You've got the kind of power inside your body this very moment to explode your future and everybody else's around you. And some of you are exploding it. Not particularly in this room, but out there, in this world. And it's a tough time, and there are a lot of decisions to make, and a lot of opposition in terms of a fight that is still so real that you only have to see the carnage along the way to know how many people are not making it. You have the distinct and perfect privilege of being in a school and in a place, in a community, with teachers, with a faculty, with an administration, who seem to me to the extent that you possibly can be shielded, that you possibly can be strengthened and protected and loved, you surely have it here. But you have some responsibility in that, to move up and out and beyond, and to and in the phrase of the Lord himself, to begin to become accountable. And I hope you will. Morally, intellectually, socially, physically, I hope you'll understand who you are and what God expects and what you can have and what we once knew if that veil just hadn't been drawn. But we can know it again, and that's part of the process for which we're here. Now, as I say that very thing, and the paradox of the gospel, I suppose, is one of the interesting issues as we study. You know, he that loses his life finds it, and you cast your bread on the waters to get it back. As I say this very thing about growing up, I have to caution you about forever and ever and ever not fleeing a kind of childhood, childlike faith and humility and dignity. That one of the worst things you could do is grow up and out of this church. You know, you just say, oh, I'm such a big boy or big girl now, I'm just going to march right out the door and down the road. I suggest to you that that's a paradox, but it's not an unhealthy one, and I think it's one that you can understand. Let me tell you a story. There was in Syria, in about the 7th century BC, the most powerful man in the military world. His name was Naaman. And he woke up one morning, and while having breakfast with his wife, a fingernail fell into the orange juice, and he knew he had leprosy. And he went to the king of Syria. I don't know whether it might have been grapefruit juice. He went to the king and said, the king of Syria, and said, look, king, I want out. I'm going to retire. My wife and we're going to go to Disneyland. We've always wanted to do it. And I don't know how long I'm going to be around, and we're going to go. Well, the king is beside himself. He's smart enough to know which side of the bread his butter's on. And Naaman is the man who puts the king of Syria on the map. And it's a very volatile life in the Middle East. It is not unlike yesterday or today, if you've read the newspaper. Everybody's sort of a ping pong ball for everybody else, and one week it's the Babylonians, and next week it's the Egyptians, and almost never the Israelites. But the Syrians are currently in charge, and this king is not about to let Naaman go. Well, they're sort of jockeying back and forth talking about this. And a little girl, a little Maya maid, over in the corner dusting with a feather duster, up from Jerusalem for the summer. She's saving money to go to Rick's. Up for the summer to Syria, says, pardon me for intruding, but I know somebody who can cure you of your leprosy. Well, they didn't stop to get all the details. That's sort of the way kings are. They jumped into this thing and sort of gathered the information and found out that she was an Israelite, and he scorched off this letter from the king of Syria to the king of Israel and said, I'm sending my man Naaman to you. I want you to cure him of leprosy. I'm sending a whole van full of some old shirts and coats and a little silver and gold, and almost anything you want will be in there, but cure this man. And it came to pass, I now read, it came to pass when the king of Israel had read the letter, he rent his clothes. Now, I don't know why these guys always rend their clothes, but they're always rending their clothes. It's a big thing with these early types to rend your clothes. If you're just a little pushed out of shape, you sort of grab your tie, you know. But if you're really nervous, you just shred, you know. But this guy is standing here in his gym suit when he gets through because he is really nervous. When the king of Syria sneezes, everybody else gets pneumonia, and he's smart enough to know that. And he says to some helpless bystander, am I God to kill and make alive that this man doth send unto me to recover a man of his leprosy? Wherefore consider, I pray you, and see how he seeketh a quarrel against me. The big bully? He knows I can't cure anybody of anything, and he's sending a leper down here, and what am I supposed to do with him? And if I don't cure him, he'll come down with a big machine gun and get me. Well, he's sort of lamenting there. The problem is that the king's been inactive. He's a prospective elder. He's been so interested in his political life, he hasn't been out to church for 8 years. And he should have been smart enough to know, as other people did, yeah, that's right. He can't cure anybody of anything. But he too has got a little Miami who says, look, they obviously mean Elisha. You couldn't muster a mustard seed. So send him to Elisha. He says, great, good idea. In the meantime, pack, I'm getting out of here. So when Naaman comes, they sort of redirect him slightly, and he goes to the tent door of Elisha. And he waits. Picture it, if you will. Cecil B. DeMille style. White horses as far as the eye can see, pulling up to this tent door. And there Naaman waits, leper that he is. And nothing happens. Elisha doesn't even come out. Somebody finally goes in and says, look, this guy's out here. Naaman, with a capital N from Syria. He's out here. Elisha says, that's tough. I've got no time for Naaman. It's the 30th of the month. I got my home teaching to do. I got this sheet to fill out. I've got no time for Naaman. Well, the poor little messenger says, look, we're all going to get it if you don't do something. So in exasperation, he pulls out a 3x5 out of his pocket and writes on it and sends this card out to Naaman. Naaman picks it up, reads it, is furious, throws the thing in the air, wheels his horse around, and is ready to run back to Syria. And you know what's going to happen when he gets there? This is what the card said. It might have been 4x6, I don't know. Go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. That's very simple, very straightforward, sort of crowbar style. And Naaman is furious. Why? Why is he furious? It just doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem right. He wanted more than that. He wanted Elisha to pounce out of there and sort of call down thunder and lightning and put his hand out and heal the leper with a lot of big words. What he really wanted was a circus. He wanted the fat man over here and the bearded lady over here and Elisha in the middle, sort of performing this wonderful miracle. And as far as bathing in this river, he says, I've got a better irrigation ditch. I've got a better irrigation ditch running right through my backyard. If you want me to wallow around in some water, I'll go home and do it, and you'll wish you hadn't. The only problem with all of that, as Naaman storms off in his fury, is that he's still a leper. He came a leper, and he's going home a leper. And somebody close to him is smart enough to understand that, and he grabs his stirrup as he's about ready to ride off and says, my father, that's not literal, it's simply a term of endearment and a way to get his attention. My father, if the prophet had bid thee do some great thing, wouldst thou not have done it? If the prophet had bid thee do some great thing, wouldst thou not have done it? And that really hits to the core of Naaman's soul, because that is exactly what he thought. See, that's the circus bit, the big thing, the big show. He expected something really tough to be demanded. Like backstroke the Mediterranean or something. And if you do, you'll be cured of leprosy. And so the little footman, the little valet says, if you'd have done that, why not rather then, when he saith to thee, wash and be clean? That is, there is some logic, Naaman, in saying you'll do the little thing, but not the big thing. I will go down in this little river because I can do that, but I can't backstroke the Mediterranean. We could understand that, Naaman. But we cannot understand, Naaman, anybody who says, oh yeah, sure, I'll take on the Mediterranean, but don't ask me to get down in this river right here. See, Naaman suffers from what I call, for lack of something else to call it, the Jackson County syndrome. Naaman says, oh, Lord, call me to Jackson County. Give me the chance. I'll have the camper packed. The Coleman lantern will be in there, bedrolls, I'll be in Wyoming by morning. But don't ask me to visit the sick. Don't ask me to make it to priesthood meeting. I don't want to bake any bread for anybody. Call me to Jackson County.